अभी तो सर ये वेबिनार फॉर्म में है। मैं चाहूँगा कि आपके कदम हमारे कैंपस में भी पड़े और फेस टू फेस भी हमारे जितने स्टूडेंट और हम लोग सब उससे लाभ उठा सकें। सर यहाँ पे ये यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ दिल्ली का डिस्टेंस लर्निंग मोड है और इसमें सर लाखों बच्चे हैं और इस साल से मतलब 2022-23 बैच से सर यहाँ एमबीए भी स्टार्ट हो गया, जो आपके साथ मैंने पहले भी शेयर किया था, और बीएमएस और बीबीए प्रोग्राम, ये तीनों प्रोग्राम, इवन इकोनॉमिक्स ऑनर्स भी स्टार्ट हुआ है सर। 6 नए प्रोग्राम इस बार स्टार्ट हुए हैं। तो यूनिवर्सिटी इस डिस्टेंस लर्निंग मोड में भी काफ़ी आगे बढ़ रहा है और उम्मीद कर रहे हैं सर कि और भी बड़े एक्सपेंशनरी मोड में आगे बढ़ेंगे। तो हमारे पार्टिसिपेंट में मेजोरिटी हमारे स्टूडेंट हैं, बट कुछ यंग फैकल्टी और लोग भी हैं और हमारी सारा सब कुछ जो है वो हमारी डायरेक्टर मैडम पायल मागू जी हैं, जो कई कैपेसिटी में अपना कह सकते हैं कि बेस्ट दे रही हैं। एंड आई ऑल्सो कीप ऑन एडमायरिंग हर। शी इज हेयर। थैंक यू मैम फॉर ज्वाइनिंग। प्रोफेसर चरण सिंह जी इज देयर and I'll request you to have a formal welcome to him, and then after that sir आप जैसा चाहें 8:30 तक का हमने रखा है सर, 7:45 बजे के आसपास, या उसके बाद हम लोग चाहेंगे तो 7:45 के आसपास क्वेश्चन के लिए खोल देंगे। बहुत सारे क्वेश्चन हो सकते हैं, उसको हम लोग मॉडरेट वे में नहीं होगा, चैट बॉक्स के थ्रू ले लेंगे, बिकॉज नंबर कुड बी लार्ज। तो माइक ओपन करके डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन पूछने में हो सकता है टाइम ज़्यादा वेस्टेज हो जाएगा, तो वी विल मॉडरेट दैट ऑल्सो। पायल मैडम इज रियली डे एंड नाइट 24/7 सर, जैसे आप करते हैं वैसे हमारी मैडम भी कर रही है।
Thank you, Professor Bijoy, for such a long introduction and for your kind words. Good evening to everyone. Good evening, Professor Charan Singh. And I heartily welcome you on behalf of Campus of Open Learning, Department of Distance and Continuing Education, University of Delhi. Sir, we are really very privileged to have you with us on this occasion of PARAKRAM Divas. In fact, there are so many students who would like to listen to you. And the Campus of Open Learning, which is one of the premier institute in the field of open and distance learning, it was established 60 years ago. And it happens to be the first institute of open learning in all over India. So Delhi University is pioneer in this in open learning, distance and open learning, and I can very proudly say that we have almost 5 lakh students at present who are enrolled in Campus of Open Learning in different courses. And fortunately, we have started with 6 new courses this year, and all those are oriented towards the job. We have launched MBA program, which is running very successfully. We have launched BBA program, BMS program, and BBA in financial administration, and also MA economics and library sciences courses. So all those students are also very happy to be with you, and once again, I heartily welcome you on behalf of University of Delhi as well as on behalf of Campus of Open Learning. Thank you so much.
Sir, आपको वो sharing, अगर if you have a slide sharing or talk, I don't know. If you want to share, that is also permitted, sir.
First of all, I must thank you all, both Professor Bijoy and Madam Payal, Professor Payal, for such a lovely introduction and inviting me for such an important occasion in the Open Learning Forum of Delhi University. And this is a very important day, the day of Subhash Chandra. Very important. So I must thank both of you. I'll be talking and not using any PowerPoint. So there's no sharing of PowerPoint that I'll be doing, but I'll love to talk and chat with all of you today. Is my voice audible and am I visible?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Perfect, sir.
Perfect. So let's continue in our talk today. Now, the topic that has been given to me is G20 leadership future prospects for India. Now, this is such a fabulous topic. And why I say it is fabulous is because once you understand what is G20 and you look at its history, and then all you have to do is remind yourself about India's history. And then you realize this presidency should not just come to us for a year. It actually belongs to us on a permanent basis. Because we have done so much for the globe, unrecognized, unsung heroes of the planet. And why I say all this, I'm going to share this with you as we proceed and go ahead in our talk. So my talk is going to be organized in the following. I'm going to first tell you, because these are students of open learning, I'm going to spend some time and give you an introduction of what G20 is, what it means, and where does it, what is the context, and where does it position India when we say that India has gained its presidency for the year. Then I'm going to talk about a few initiatives that G20 wants to undertake. And then I'm going to talk about India and India's position as far as G20 is concerned. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at to begin with, to look at what is G20. As you know, the globe is passing through a very difficult time. It's a difficult time not only in terms of finances, it's also a very difficult time in terms of climate. And this sort of a climate change has not happened in thousands of years. Actually, nobody knows that the planet is warming at such a rapid rate that the glaciers are melting and water levels would rise so that many towns on the ocean front could just get stuck. This sort of a climate change was not heard of, and therefore nobody thought that this sort of a thing can ever happen. So on one hand, the world has moved from financial crisis regularly, and the latest one, as you know, happened, of course, not the Great Depression of 1930, but the global financial recession that has happened starting from Lehman Brothers in 2008. There's been no turning back. There's been trouble after trouble. Series of issues have happened since then. So the world, we need to sit together and talk about it. As far as the climate change is concerned, we all know, and I've just give you a bird's eye view of where the world could be landing. There are issues of green development, which means that the development model which we have seen in the last 200 odd years is probably not the correct development model. There is probably an alternate development model, and that alternate development model actually lies in India, because for thousands of years, and it's been documented by various scholars, for thousands of years, India was the richest country on the planet. And when we say India was the richest country on the planet, it just wasn't just one of the richest. It was the most richest. Today, America accounts for about 20% of world GDP. For 1,000 years, India accounted for about 33% of world GDP. So you can imagine the might, the respect and credibility India had, and the policies that India pursued were sustainable, that for thousands of years we were continuing to be the richest. For 2,000 odd years, India continued to account for more than 20% of GDP and less than 33. We were still the richest. It's just because we were the richest for such a long time that everybody in the world would envy us, come looking for us, come looking for our growth model, and so came the people who would plunder us. And so, unfortunately, came the people like from Britain and other European areas to colonize us. And during this process of plundering, foreign rule, and colonial rule, India suffered the worst fate. Our resources were depleted. Literacy, our local literacy levels were challenged, undermined, ridiculed, and a foreign education system imposed upon us, and our richnesses were reduced to poverty. So much so, after about 800, 1100 years of foreign rule in one form or the other, the literacy level in India was just around 10%, and poverty level in India how can we have lifestyle for environment growth? Can we follow a lifestyle which ensures sustainable and environmental friendly growth? These issues are being discussed. Now, when the presidency has come to India, India has given one slogan which is known to all of us in our country. And because we have a common thread, and because Sanskrit is the common language amongst us for most of the Indian languages today, the objective, the motto that we have offered to the world is a very simple one, very understandable, and extremely emotional. We just have one earth, no alternative. On this earth, we have now realized we are one family. Whatever you do in the Western world impacts the emerging countries, and whatever you do in the emerging countries sooner or later impacts the Western world. If there is a severe carbon footprint in any part of the world, on any area in the planet, the whole planet suffers. You can use coal in one corner of the planet, but the whole planet will suffer. You can use fossil oil, and so would the same thing happen. The world realized there is just one earth. You can use its resources the way you want. And we are just one family, which means we survive, we live, we thrive, we sink, we do anything, we do it together. That means our future is linked. Now, that means lots of responsibility on each one of us. No country now can escape accountability and responsibility. Anything we do it. That means in the last 300 years, since the Industrial Revolution, somebody has not taken their responsibility properly. No country, I often say, people who become rich very fast cannot cope with richness. In the last 300 years, same is true for advanced countries. They became very fast with the Industrial Revolution. They did not have the resources of their own. They plundered and took it from their colonies, cheated them, and then became rich in a very short time for advanced countries. It was not organic hard work, not organic growth, but it was by deception and cheating, and therefore their growth was artificial. They did not know how to live with the richness. They exploited everything that came their way, extremely greedy, chasing materialistic things. In the name of patents, they were innovative, but those innovations were not time tested. Consequently, the world has reached a situation of fate which is very dreaded and very scary. In contrast, the India growth model is extremely sustainable. If you can sustain a growth model, grow from riches to riches for thousands of years, unlike the Western model, which only allowed you to grow at a peak in 300 years but brought the world to a brink of a crash. Unlike this Western model, India's growth model was far more sustainable. The growth model of India was very simple. It believed in the simple concept that earth has to be respected like your mother. The water had to be respected like your father. The air had to be respected like your teacher. Very simple formula. The basic elements on which the whole planet survives, the basic elements were full of respect. Air, water, and earth, you couldn't live without it. As you can't live without your father, you can't come on this planet without your father or mother, and you cannot thrive and blossom without the teacher. So was the status given to these elements. And then, not only that, once these respectful attitude towards the elements was mentioned, anything that got created was equally respected. The plants, the trees, they were worshipped. Green belt, and each tree had its value. And it was determined even before botanical sciences developed, before microscopes came into existence, before sophisticated instruments to measure whether plants can breathe ever were thought. The Indian philosophers and experts had already discovered which plant releases what type of oxygen and other gases. Even before chemistry had started finding place, Indians knew that the neem tree can give oxygen day and night. The people tree had its own value. The tulsi plant had its own value. The guava leaves can take care of your dental problems. Where did this research come from? The Ayurveda. And where does the Ayurveda, how much time do you date it back? Thousands of years. So anything that got created from three elements were respected and worshipped. When it came to the birds and the animals, again, the same concept of live and let live, and not just live and let live respectfully and allow others to live respectfully. So much so that birds were considered the vehicles of God. Many animals, some ferocious, were also considered as vehicles of God. So much so that the cow was respected as a mother because cow milk could sustain the child, and cow products were part of your basic meal and food cycle. So the elements are respected, the plants are respected, the flora fauna are respected, and so coexistence happens. And therefore, when you grow, the growth model that you have in mind is sustainable. You don't want to cut trees and make forests vanish. No, you don't want to pollute air or water. All your patents are respectful to the nature and the environment in which you live. The patents have been tested. They are not there to exploit one element against the other. One family did not say the Homo sapiens are the best and that the cow and the animals and the flowers are not. The Homo sapiens will coexist with the plants and animals. And that is why, in the alternate growth model that India experimented with, the average span of life was easily 100 years and more. The best countries in the world, we speak of the best modern sciences and medical health, still average around 85 years of lifespan. India, on an average, was more than 100. That means it was a sustainable model for the environment, it was a sustainable model for the individual. Coexistence was what was taught, and coexistence meant the concept of family was not restricted to me and my brothers, sisters, father, and mother. It was not just restricted to Homo sapiens, it was one planet, one family. That lesson, that understanding of not to exploit, was there in the Indian traditional wisdom. Each one was respected, and each one was regarded as useful for the other. You hurt one, you hurt the others. You respect one, you respect the whole. This is not the Western model of growth. So, by about late last century, the world realized that there is a big problem that is happening, and one needs to revisit as to what is going on. So, the G20 was founded in 1999, and the members of the G20 are basically advanced countries of the world and a few emerging countries, and of course the European Union. These countries put together, they are both industrialized and developed countries mostly, and few developing countries, and they account for 80% of the world output. They account for 75% of international trade, two-thirds of the global population, and 60% of the world land area. So that means it's a very influential chunk of policymakers. Therefore, it also implies that G20 can drive the agenda of the planet. Because herein, the leaders of these countries will put their head together, think together, plan together, at least flag the issues together, at least make people learn concerns of the world will be brought on the table, and therefore some remedies, some solutions will be thought together. So this consists of high-ranking officials. The top officials of the country are always there, which includes the Prime Minister or the President of the country, the finance ministers of the country, the governors of the countries. And basically, the finance ministers and the governors closely interact throughout the year and discuss various issues that keep coming up at these interactions. Earlier, they were not meeting regularly. But then, over the years, it became important that these countries, the G20, they should start moving on an annual basis, discuss issues, think about the solutions, and start working on an annual basis. So, from 2006 onwards, many meetings have taken place, and every time the themes would be different. The theme of the 2006 G20 meeting was building and sustaining prosperity. So the issues discussed during that time was how to achieve sustainable growth. And this is 2006. What about global energy and resource commodity prices and markets? And then reforms of the most important multilateral institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, 2006. And the world had then started thinking about the demographic changes that are taking place in the world. In 2007, South Africa, they were hosting the G20. In 2008, Brazil, and this is very interesting how the history has developed over the years. In 2008, the Brazil's Minister of Finance proposed dialogue on competition in financial markets, clean energy, economic development, and fiscal elements of growth and development. So you can see these issues are coming over and over again. In 2008 happened the Lehman Brothers. The global financial crisis starts. In the meeting of the G7 finance ministers, which is the top most developed countries, with no developing country as a member there, President Bush already mentioned that there is a need to finding solutions to the economic crisis of 2008. Now, this is where I think the world has to think with hindsight. The subprime crisis that precipitated in the Lehman Brothers in 2008, the subprime crisis had started in a way earlier. And why the Wall Street and why the financial experts, the policymakers, the watchdogs, the market regulators turned a blind eye to the derivative products. We all know about the mortgage-backed securities, the asset-backed securities, mainly in the housing sector, and loans being given to people who did not have a regular income stream or loans being given more than their capacity. We all know. And it was obvious it will precipitate one day. And it did. Countries like India, far more responsible, conservative in their approach, but visionaries, did not implement or adopt these fancy, fashionable, difficult to understand, exotic instruments like these mortgage-backed securities. They withstood the pressure. They withstood the sustained pressure, saying these are modern, well developed, highly collateralized, dynamic financial instruments. No, India said no, we will not accept these. The credit, of course, goes to the then governors, both Bimal Jalan and Dr. Y.V. Reddy. So the journey keeps moving. Of the G20 and various issues keep coming up in various annual meetings. The summits were also held in 2016 in China, in 2017 in Germany, in 2018 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and the 2019 in Japan. The 2020 summit was scheduled in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, but because there was a COVID time, it was virtually held. The 21 summit was in Rome, Italy, and the 2022 summit was in Indonesia, Bali. By that time, I'm sure we all Indians knew that G20 is happening, and next year we are in the presidency. The presidency moves in terms of a troika, the immediate past, the current, and the future. So this year, when we are in the presidency, the troika consists of Indonesia, the immediate past president, India, the current president, and Brazil, the next one. It will move on to Brazil next year. India will be part of the troika, India, Brazil, and South Africa. And then it will move on to South Africa and Brazil, South Africa, and the next country. The point I am making is that we, at this point of time, are very lucky that we have Indonesia, India, and Brazil as 3 consecutive years of the presidency. That means the emerging markets are at the helm of affairs in providing inputs, discussing issues, flagging the issues in the international market. So, when we talk about the G20, it has various implications and it has various impact. Tourism, of course, is one important thing that benefits from G20 meetings. It is in 2014 a very interesting episode, something similar to what is happening now. The Australian foreign minister had proposed, and it was in Brisbane, to ban Russia from the summit over its annexation of Ukrainian Crimea. And then the democratic values in G20 prevailed, and they said, no, this cannot happen. The G20 belongs to all of us, and one single country cannot determine its nature and its character. So, therefore, the agenda of the G20 is reasonably universal in nature. Everybody knows about it, and also generally it is applicable where every country feels the ownership of it. For example, in 2016, the G20 framed its commitment to the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development Goals in 3 themes: the promotion of strong, sustainable, and balanced growth, protection of the planet from degradation, and this is 2016, and furthering cooperation with low income and developing countries. Now, this is where, and that is the reason I'm flagging it, this is where I would ask you for your attention. Now, the thought of seeking cooperation from low income and developing countries is coming in a big way. Whereas this should have come much earlier when United Nations was formed in 1945-46. Going on further, Indonesia last year focused on the global COVID-19 pandemic and how to collectively overcome the challenge that COVID posed. The 3 priorities of Indonesia's presidency were global health, the overall global health architecture, digital transformation, and sustainable energy transitions. It is in this background that India assumes, in the historical context as well as the development that has happened, and what I've given you is a bird's eye view of the G20, that India assumes the presidency of this important virtual think tank. And in this important virtual think tank, once again, we reminded the world that we are just having one earth and there's no alternative. We are one family. Something happens, we all suffer together. Now, when in 2016, one has already said we need cooperation from the least developed and developing countries. So we are one now. And now we share same future. As an economist, for a long time, we used to think that we can decouple from the rest of the world. If we do not trade much with them, if our imports are not much and we don't get things from them, our exports are not much, the world is not dependent on us. Neither are we dependent on the world in ensuring export markets exist and therefore production in my country happens. We can decouple. But none of us, none of the economists thought, and none of the scholars, philosophers, scientists thought that it will be the climate which will drive the world in understanding that we are one family. And that the future of our existence, that the future of our children, and the future of commodities and plants and animals before we become extinct belongs on our common interaction. So therefore, it is on our shoulders, India's shoulder, when the time has come to showcase to the world that how India, over these last so many years, and for thousands of years, we were taking care of the whole planet, the whole ecosystem, the flora and fauna, the basic elements that I narrated to you right in the beginning. The issue is very clear. The world is one, the future is common, and that's not related just through finance or through economics. It is also related through geopolitics. It's also related through the common ideologies that we follow in one country versus the other country. It also relates to accepting differences of opinion and coexisting, something that the democratic values of India have demonstrated over thousands of years. Today is the day when the whole country is celebrating Subhash Chandra Bose. If you look at the history of Subhash Chandra Bose and India's freedom movement, on one hand you have Indian National Congress, which believes and says peaceful agitation. On the other hand, you have Subhash Chandra Bose, who believes as a revolutionary, taking up the arms, organizing military, and if need be, taking military action. He mobilizes forces, he sets up Indian National Army, and very modern in his concept, he has the women's wing too, and he says, if you do not understand logic, we can uproot the British rule. India, I think, will have to recognize the role of the revolutionaries in the freedom struggle. On one hand, the Indian National Congress led by Mahatma Gandhi and supported by Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Patel and the leaders that we are familiar with, is pushing India's independence. On the other hand, are the revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, like Subhash Chandra Bose, who are ready to take up arms. Please remember, India, with its philosophy of tolerance, respect for others, also had Subhash Chandra Bose as president of Indian National Congress. And I think the freedom struggle of India will have to be rewritten, taking into account the role of such revolutionaries. But the point that I'm making here is the richness of India's philosophy, the richness of India's attitude towards tolerating another viewpoint, and how that compels the forces, they be in power or you call them the enemy forces, to recognize the strength of the country. I'm of the firm belief that if history is revisited, the role of Subhash Chandra Bose, the day we are celebrating today, will be highlighted in a more appropriate manner and not just thought as a sideshow. But that is India's richness. We have a common objective of attaining independence. There are various ways through which we will attain it. There can be peaceful agitation of Mahatma Gandhi. There can be Indian National Army of Subhash Chandra Bose. And people will respect and support both. And that is how we got our independence. My own view, of course, is there is an economic theory of India's independence which has yet not been properly investigated. And if I get time, I propose to do that. And my economic theory of India's economic independence, India's political independence, comes from India's economic story. India attracted the East India Company because of the richness. And before the East India Company came, the plunderers had come from various places. They would plunder and go. Some of them settled here and set up an empire, and the whole empire would be again plundering the country, of course, moving from one corner to the other and trying to win one state over the other and all take the benefits of local kings and their weaknesses. But once the East India Company came and settled here, they realized what is happening in India, and greedily they decided to play their game. And it's not only that the British came and colonized India, there are a few other countries who also came. But British, of course, played the most important, or let me quote it, quote unquote it, the dirty role, and did havoc with India, its education system, its own health architecture. Well, that's topic for another day. But the economic theory of India's political independence would say that when India had bled enough, when even the bone marrow had been sucked, when resources had been exploited to the maximum, when people had been pushed into poverty, it is then that the British must have thought that the cost of sustaining this country as a colony is now break evening with the revenue that we can suck out of this country. And therefore, if we live a day longer here, the cost will increase than the benefit, and let's just move out. And I'm going to investigate this hypothesis further in the years to come. So, again, there's diversity of thought, and the country tolerates it and accepts it. Given the situation when India took over the presidency, the situation globally was very grim. The grimness of the situation comes from handling of the COVID crisis, the pandemic, where many countries had aggressively pursued policies during COVID, pouring money into the systems without worrying of tomorrow. This strategy, this style had started from 2008 with the crash of the Lehman Brothers. Actually, the subprime crisis, which was the cause of the Lehman Brothers, and the asset-backed securities and derivative products, which led to all this, which started around 2000, these were not being properly monitored, supervised, or regulated. So the issue of the economic crisis emanates, takes birth, originates from the financial sector. Because of lack of regulation and supervision, and the philosophy behind it, that the private sector knows it best, and they know what is best for their future, one need not touch them, regulate, or supervise them, or against a hardcore regulation, a soft touch regulation is sufficient. That philosophy was costing dear to the advanced countries which imitate each other, be it North America, be it Europe, or be it England. It would not be wrong to say that the global financial crisis was actually not a global financial crisis. It was a crisis of the advanced countries, and they should be held accountable for that irresponsible behavior in tolerating products which they did not understand and not regulating the derivatives market in time and ensuring they do not engulf the whole financial market in fire, which it eventually did. It is obviously the crisis of the advanced countries because they imitate each other. North America, Europe, and Britain are the factors, the countries, their regulators need to be held accounted for this crisis, which took the world back by more than a decade. And when the world was still very fragile, COVID happened. And on a fragile countries, on a fragile global economy, on a fragile national economies, COVID was the last straw on the camel's back. In contrast, were countries like India, which withstood the pressure that the advanced countries were imposing on them repeatedly. And let me give you a few examples. The first example I would like to share with you is on capital account convertibility. Look at the pressure that was put on India on accepting capital account convertibility. Repeatedly, repeatedly. Since we undertook the reforms of 1996, 1991, we were under pressure to accept capital account convertibility. We did the first Tarapur Committee report, 96. We did the second Tarapur Committee report, 2007. And with great difficulty, you should read the speeches of the governors at that time saying that capital account convertibility is not for India. We are too vulnerable. We are still very naive and we will be totally overtaken. It will impact our national agendas. It will impact the local economy, local people who are still very vulnerable, and capital account convertibility is not suitable for India. Please look up the speeches of the governors and deputy governors at that time and realize the tremendous pressure put on India. And India, with its wisdom, withstood that pressure and said, we will not go for capital account convertibility. Much later, by 2012, the world recognized that India was correct. And capital account convertibility needs certain strength within the country and the institutions. The second example is on inflation targeting. Inflation targeting became very influential concept, very fashionable, started from a very mundane discussion, not by an economist or a theorist, by a political functionary in New Zealand, and suddenly was adopted by many countries in the world. Multinational institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, especially the IMF, started pushing for implementing inflation targeting in various countries, including India. While most of the countries in the world adopted it, India for a very long time withstood the pressure. Please read the speeches by Dr. Y.V. Reddy, Governor Bimal Jalan, and see how India said that our local minted multiple indicator approach is any day better than your inflation targeting. You will be surprised. The global financial crisis of 2008 has been partially blamed by many economists and scholars that the inflation targeting imposed blinkers on the eyes of the policymakers and political functionaries, and they thought everything is fine. But inflation targeting was just a camouflage. Behind the inflation targeting, inside the economy, many things were happening, and the attention was diverted away from those because the whole world kept thinking of inflation target. Academic studies, scholarly research repeatedly shows, and there's an excellent paper by Lawrence Ball from Johns Hopkins, that the countries which adopted inflation targeting and countries which did not adopt inflation targeting, their performances were rather similar. But inflation targeting imposed hardcore restrictions which impacted growth, and there was a sacrifice ratio. India resisted inflation targeting for a very long time. Very long time. So, take the third case, the derivatives. Well, the world adopted the derivatives, and they were very sophisticated derivatives. India only introduced slowly, reluctantly, very carefully, conservatively, plain vanilla derivatives. But the Western world ridiculed India that why can't they adopt them? And as I just mentioned in the introduction, we resisted it. And then the whole world knows what happened because of aggressively following the derivatives. So much so, one Nobel laureate and respected one claimed that if India's governor was the chairman and president of Fed Reserve, the global financial crisis, which I say is wrongly worded, it's not global, it is the Western world, it's North American led, it's advanced countries led financial crisis. And through spillovers, the rest of the world got impacted. So they're the ones who should be blamed for it. But the Nobel laureate Stiglitz clearly said if Governor Reddy was the chairman of Fed Reserve, this quote unquote global financial crisis would not have occurred. This is the country that India is. And this is the time when the whole world is shaking and suffering from economic situation which is bad. India assumes the presidency. While India's historical evolution, its history of thousands of years, proves that it can be the richest country on the planet with innovations and inventions which do not hurt the climate. Its philosophy is very germane to sustainable growth pattern, respect for every other element on the planet. India's recent history also is replete and rich with policies, initiatives which are very conducive to overall growth. Let me continue to share one more example with you and then move on to the future. In COVID, as you would have noticed, and I mentioned briefly and I'm going to elaborate now, the fiscal packages provided by various countries ranged substantially higher than India. And those have come home to roost now. India, poor country relatively, with per capita income of hardly $2,000, vis-a-vis America's $60,000. India also provided fiscal support to its citizens, partially quantified, partially not quantified. The support that India provided was in terms of food, free rations, free medical facilities, free vaccination, free hospitalization, and even the private hospitals were invited, rather requested to ensure that nobody goes unattended. So much so that the Prime Minister used his personal image and credibility
to request the private sector in the initial stages of the pandemic not to lay off people and support as much as possible, which they did. Unlike the Western world, where as the sales plummeted, as the lockdowns happened, people were just left on the street. And obviously, the government had to come and give them doles and unemployment allowances. But what India did, India very interestingly, though conservative, very intelligently used its limited resources to ensure that people are able to live and survive. While the Food Corporation of India godowns were full of our wheat and rice, they were immediately deployed to provide them across the country. A study by the executive director at the IMF, Surjit Singh Bhalla, with his co-authors Dr. Arvind Virmani and Karan Bhasin, document that support, unlike the rest of the world, where because of pandemic people just fell into poverty, that support by the government held many people above the poverty line. Because when you get unemployment allowances, what would you do? Spend it on food or medicines, and the government took care of both. While Bhalla Virmani Bhasin study shows that the food support took care of people who could fall below the poverty line, the quantification of the health support has yet not been attempted by any scholar, and that waits to be done. And once that is done, you will see India's visionary approach amidst limited resources would be a lesson, a case study for the world to follow. And how you take care of your country despite the limited resources. Similarly, the policies that were used at that time were not knee jerk reactions, not aggressive, carefully calibrated, and futuristic in approach. That means while immediate support was being provided in terms of fiscal policy, the capital expenditure kept rising so that the multiplier effect on employment and futuristic growth of the country is not impacted. Fiscal experts have yet to quantify this aspect too, which waits to be done. Similarly, the financial sector, be it the insurance, and the time was used to improve and encourage insurance sector, be it the banking sector, or be it the NBFCs. Each one of them were helped with carefully crafted policies laser beamed on each of these subsectors. As far as employment is concerned, the Mudra schemes that were announced, the insurance schemes and social security measures that were announced, and the schemes for headload workers and cart business people, rediwalas, those were also very carefully crafted and delivered. Those schemes and the impact of those schemes have yet to be assessed by any economist or public policy expert. Once that is done, you will see we will have so much to show to the world that amidst a crisis, one need not be following a knee jerk reaction to please the people. But if you are strong, confident, careful, you can execute policies at very low cost, which are more effective than knee jerk reactions. And why do I keep repeating this word knee jerk reactions? That brings me to the next part of what I want to share with you. Consequent to these policies by the advanced countries, which were neither laser beamed, nor well thought, nor well crafted, resulted in high liquidity into the economies of these countries. While they were still recovering from the derivative products which led them to subprime, while they were still recovering from the heavy unconventional monetary policies that were again pursued aggressively mindlessly by the advanced countries without recognizing the spillovers that would happen on many other parts of the world, including emerging countries, including India. The fiscal policy only escalated the liquidity supply in the system. Consequently, when a little aberration of a country invading or fighting with another country happened, Russia versus Ukraine, it precipitated into a huge crisis. The gasoline prices, the petroleum prices shot up. Some commodity prices, agriculture products, fertilizers, some metals in which Russia and Ukraine played a prominent role also shot up. Because of COVID, supply chains were already strained, and now with this conflict, they were further strained. Inflation in these countries was 5 times their average of 30 years. To illustrate, in America, inflation generally is in the range of 2% if you take a 30-year average. So in Europe, so in England. And the inflation in these countries was rising to 10%, 5 times more than national average of last 30 years. Compare it with India. India's national average of 30 years of inflation is around 6%. Our inflation target band, which we adopted around 2014 after lots of reluctance, is in the range of 4 plus minus 2. That means 2 to 6%. 6% is the upper limit. That is where we have been hovering. If you look at the monitorable inflation, which is the CPI combined. Now, because inflation was 5 times their tolerance level or 30-year average, they had to now mindlessly again, knowing that the prices are high because of the conflict, started raising the interest rates. Economic theory is very clear. When you pump in more money, inflation will happen. When you raise the interest rates, growth will suffer. When you pump in more money, liquidity increases, inflation goes up. But when you raise the interest rates, the growth rate for the whole economy is high. The growth rate for the whole economy can suffer. Unemployment is high. And that's exactly what is going to play out, has started playing out for us in the world to see. 2023 will be a year where an artificial recession would have been forced upon the advanced countries by their own central banks, be it Fed Reserve, be it Bank of England, or be it the European Central Bank, ECB. They do what they want to do. But the matter of concern is we are in a globally integrated world. We are one family. We are one earth. We have one future. The spillovers of these advanced countries will hit emerging countries and least developed countries and vulnerable countries, including India, adversely. And this recognition that we are one and your action can impact me is not fully realized. Where is the global accountability? Where is the global responsibility? Nowhere. And that is why when Professor asked me that on Subhash Chandra Bose days, what should be the topic? I said, India's G-20 presidency. A day has come when we have to tell to the world, and this is our onus and our good luck, that we have been given this opportunity to tell to the world that you have to be accountable, you have to be respectful, you have to be responsible for the whole planet. Because we are not saying just because we want to say, but we are saying with 3,000 years of experience. When we provided financial, economic leadership to the world, where from anywhere in the world people wanted to just come and work and look and see India, something which For some time, the attitude was towards UK, or for some time, the attitude is towards America. People wanted to just come to India. We have lived through it, we have experienced it, and we have been extremely responsible. And therefore, when the presidency has come to India, I think we need to showcase to the world you can do a growth model which is sustainable on a long term basis. And we have did it. We have done it in the past, and we can do it, and the whole world needs to ponder over it and do it. What do you mean by sustainable? The term sustainable would mean different things to different people. But should sustainable not be intergenerational? And at any point of time, 3 to 4 generations are alive, the great grandparents, the grandparents, the parents, and the children. But should sustainable not be intergenerational? Which means 100 of years back and hundred of years ahead. And if you want to have a sustainable climate, you want to have a sustainable development, and you believe the planet is one, the earth is one, and our future is interlinked, each one will have to be more responsible and accountable to each one at the present point of time as well as the future point of time. How do you do it? And the last 2 minutes I want to spend before I conclude and thank you is how to do it. And my suggestion is the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, the multinational institutions will have to apply their mind, will have to build a consensus, will have to say, now we are in it together. We sail or we sink together. You can be on a Titanic, the most modern ship that has ever been built. But if in one corner of Titanic somebody is doing stupid things, the ship can sink, irrespective that on the other side of the ship you have the most rich, influential policymakers sitting. Does not matter. Once you're sailing in the high seas, you are in the middle of the ocean, you are one. And that's exactly what is happening now. We are either sinking together or we are swimming together. And I think the story of the ship has to be taken seriously, and everybody in the world will have to be accountable for their behavior so that we are able to give to the next generation, next generations, the planet as we had received it. For that, the presidency of G20, given the concept of, as I mentioned, respecting each other, one family concept that India practices, needs to be shared, and hopefully by the end we share the pattern with Brazil in another 8 9 months. The world would be a place which recognizes, understands the concept of one family, and also understands that India can provide intellectual, political leadership to the planet. And I think that will be the way to celebrate the anniversary of Subhash Chandra Bose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. It was truly very high and enriched talk. Sir, 2 3 points which I like to share with you. Sir, आपके जितने भी बात थे वो historically it started and India's enriched strength and potential, which again has to be reinvented. It has to be re-put into the production activity, and taking the lead is really needed. Sir, one more thing, which you said that now it is one earth, one family, one future. The very much agenda is there, and I am sure this emerging economy, who had got more rooting compared to advanced economy, and especially India, will give a good direction and momentum to the entire world, that will not let it to sink, at least in the mid of the ocean, sir. Whatsoever reason is, it will take the earth out. But 2, 3 points I'll request you, sir, if you can really little more on that. Like you were talking about target, monetary target or inflation target, which has to be there, which somehow was diverting the attention from the main cause. And India also has adopted from 2016 onward the monetary targeting. So, is there any threat related to that? Is it really diverting our attention also from the real cause? Or now it is in a balanced way?
My own personal view is in series of articles that I've written even after inflation targeting was adopted, underlining the fact that in a young demographic country like India, where the focus has to be employment and growth, chasing a target of inflation can be little detrimental. And let me elaborate. Firstly, when you talk of inflation targeting, you have taken a sample. CPI is a sample-based variable. Unlike the deflation, unlike the deflator, which is taking the whole economy into account, there's no doubt that inflation as measured by CPI and the deflator as measured by the GDP deflator have common turning points generally, not always. But CPI, which you monitor, is a sample based, and therefore how accurate it is not very clear. Secondly, in a country like India, unlike the Western world, where markets are well developed, the transmission cannot be specified. It's very crude. The time that is required for the transmission to complete is also not specified. Thirdly, in a country like India, where supply side shocks mainly determine the price level, oil not determined in our country, depends on what Russia does, OPEC does, Norway does, and oil is a part of my basket, and that gets influenced from outside. Food, which is also part of my basket, about 40%, and what America does with the corn, or Russia Ukraine war and the wheat, and that impacts the price and my index. So there are quite a few supply side for which India's demand side cannot really be successful in imposing limits. Therefore, inflation target in a country like ours will not yield the results which it may yield in Western world. Even in the Western world, the best of the best economists have said inflation targeting is dead. And inflation targeting does not serve the purpose. You can read about economists sitting at the Kennedy School at Harvard talking about it and saying inflation targeting is not the right thing to do. In those advanced countries where markets are developed and instruments are sharp, the transmission is clear, effectiveness is possible. If they have given up, why should we in India continue to rely and depend on it? So my personal view is, especially now after COVID, that inflation targeting regime needs to be revisited and revised. Does it put blinkers? Regulator that we have, the Reserve Bank, an outstanding regulator. Actually, Fed Reserve takes lessons from India's Reserve Bank. And as you know, I was part of the Reserve Bank. I can tell you with utmost confidence that that is true. I myself had an opportunity to interact with the Fed Reserve regional chair in San Francisco and talk about the regulation that India does about the banking system, not once, but more than once. So I can tell you that the regulator in India is highly respected, and therefore That is the reason the banking system in the country is very strong. So, to some extent, our attention has not been diverted, unlike the Western world where it got diverted. But in principle, I am of the view that the multiple indicator approach, which was minted in our country and tested very carefully during the Asian crisis, is something which we need to showcase to the world and let the world adopt it. And if the world had adopted the schemes under the multiple indicator approach, which was minted in India, many of these issues would not have cropped up because we were pursuing a multi-angular target. Illustratively, we will look at not only inflation, but we will look at fiscal deficit, we will look at interest rates prevailing in the country. We will look at the exchange rate. We will look at the current account deficit. We had a complete 360-degree view of the economy. And we look at the non-performing assets of the banking system. As those were being watched, and the focus was not only on inflation target, do you think the global financial crisis would have taken place? No, because NPAs were left ignored, the whole focus was on inflation targeting. So fortunately, in our country, given the good regulator that we have, I don't think attention has been diverted, but I think for the rest of the world, it is. Given that multiple indicator approach is our baby, I think we should adopt it. And under the multiple indicator approach, inflation targeting is one such indicator. And that therefore, if we adopt multiple indicator approach or go back to multiple indicator approach, we haven't lost much. We have rather gained the complete picture once again.
Thank you, sir. It was really very elaborate talk. Before I'll open it to the participant to ask the question, one more important point, which I'd like to have, couple of minutes of your explanation. Last time of meet, there was two observation, and first was that world is at the gate of recession, and second was India is the ray of hope. How you really look these two statements made by this highest institution of the globe with respect to economic happenings and future prospects?
So you see that there were meetings at Davos recently, and over there different people spoke about it. But you will be surprised, India emerged as the most important highlight of the economists, public policymakers, central bankers, all of those who were connected at Davos. What did they say? India is providing the right direction, following policies which are robust, and the world has to recognize that. Even Kenneth Rogoff, who is the chief economic advisor of the IMF, chief economist, director of research, and a professor at Harvard University, even he, in his interview, repeatedly said, India is the ray of hope. And why do they keep saying that? Is because the policies in the pandemic that India pursued and the results of those policies, as you can see yourself, that the growth rate is the highest in the world despite the pandemic. Inflation is amongst the lowest despite the pandemic, and all those things, all those factors which are applicable to other countries are applicable to India too. The depreciation of the exchange rate is not the maximum, it is moderate against international currencies. So Indian currency has withstood the pressure. The financial sector is robust. The non-performing assets are amongst the lowest. The profits which are now being declared for the quarter ending December 2022 are amongst the best. You must have read in the papers today that the government has no intention to provide any capital adequacy support to the Indian banking system because the banks are doing so well, despite the fact that the interest rate cycle is changing and treasury profits may not materialize. So given that the financial sector is strong, the fiscal policies are doing well, the monetary policy is doing well in India, and the economy is growing at the fastest pace. Obviously, it's a ray of hope. In my presentation, even otherwise, I missed 2 points and I must share those. One is, we have been very fortunate. Agriculture sector has done and stood by us during these years. The stocks that we maintained and the judicious way we have used our food grain stocks is something exemplary for the rest of the world to see. The credit goes to the current government in ensuring and taking this opportunity to, when needed, stop exports of certain food grade items so that the Indian stocks are totally augmented and respected. The other is the MSME sector. In the MSME sector, again, during COVID, the government as well as the bank regulator, the Reserve Bank, made sure that enough accommodation is provided to the MSME sector because MSME sectors contribute significantly to production and exports, and this sector is supported carefully. To me, sometimes I think the policy making has been so well crafted. It's like a potter. While you hold the system together, you need to pat it from outside, you need to even shape it from inside. And just imagine the potter's wheel in your mind and think about how economy is being nurtured and cared by the policymakers and the political party in power. And you will realize that the MSME sector, which was very vulnerable, like soft mud from which a pot has to be made, very carefully nurtured and shaped and taken care and produced. These are the factors which the rest of the world is watching, and then of the view that this country can provide the leadership to the world. Also, when you look at the global leadership, one thing which is very important is the confidence that you have in your own system and the faith you have in your policy advice. And that is where, here is the story. While the globally meltdown is taking place, India records the highest exports ever, crossing all previous bars. It's proof that the pudding is right. And then the confidence with which the political authorities are conducting themselves, announcing policies, and the country is paying heed to those policies, and growth is continuously high, is another fact that the world says, okay, here is a country we can afford to listen because this is a country which is not on the brink of any crisis. Just imagine what happened in the neighborhood just a few months back. India is not in that situation. All our policies are well thought of. In case a policy has come which is not acceptable, that's withdrawn at the right time. So the leadership qualities which are visible, which is taking the country together forward, and growth is getting recorded, that all highlights to the fact that the country is confidently moving ahead. That is what the ray of light is. That is where the hope is.
Thank you, sir. From the entire discussion, it is very clear that we have now a bright future, and India will be actually going to be Vishwaguru, and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam of that Mahapanishad is going to be really true through this leadership. Now I'll request participant to put the question. You can, yes, one I am finding, sir. Uh, Throw light on the current status of globalization process and India's role in it. So, sir, Mohit Parmaras Singh is asking that could you please throw light on the current status of globalization process and India's role in it?
See, one thing is very clear that after the global financial crisis, in most of the countries of the world, a wave of protectionism has come. If you remember, even Trump in America started saying that we want things to be produced in America. We want American production to come back to America and all those things. So in that sense, protectionism against or versus globalization started in a very big way across the world. If you look at the story of globalization, if you look at 50s and 60s, the world did not believe in globalization. Every country believed in self-sufficiency, producing things on their own. Though there were theories of international trade which said you could look at comparative advantage and it is beneficial to produce things where you have a comparative advantage and trade it with other countries and take advantage of the comparative advantage of those countries. So theories of international trade, both by Adam Smith and all those are very known and very popular, and you can Google and see all those theories. But in 80s and 90s, the wave of globalization started. Countries started opening up, stock markets playing a role, and with internet and information of each other country available to anyone, everyone, and global analysts coming in, and lots of money moving from one country to the other, and lots of resources in advanced countries and looking for places where they can get high returns, those all started finding ways and the money started moving. Money not only started moving in FDI, which means you are looking for production opportunities in other countries, it also started moving in terms of the portfolio, where the money would get you quick returns and flow around very swiftly from one country to the other. The payment systems, the banking system, the resources, and the multinational financial institutions, they played quite a prominent role in this movement and global integration of the financial world. So the world became highly globalized for about 25 to 30 years. And everybody looked at the advantages of globalization. Nevertheless, I was studying at Harvard in 2003 and 4, and when India became an important, very important exporter of IT related services, there were concerns in public documents that India is robbing the Western world of jobs because India has now become the hub of IT services, and those were in Bangalore and in Hyderabad. Remember, the call centers had started by that time, and call centers were providing support to all countries in the world. Even when accents of the same language, English, were different, call centers would train people to speak in Australian accent or British accent or American accent and conduct business. Call centers were doing very good business at that point of time. So, globalization was at its peak. Manpower movement and labor movement also started. For a long time, India was having the brain drain, and all educated IITs and IIMs would go abroad. But when globalization started, many of them came back to India, and many of the foreigners came back to India because so many job opportunities and absolutely interesting, lucrative job opportunities opened up in India. Globalization was really doing well. In the last 8 to 10 years, especially when Trump and after the global crisis, when Trump started saying that he would like jobs in America rather than jobs outside America, and he would like make in America, that slogan which he made, globalization suffered a jolt. And therefore, I would say globalization is on the back foot now because every country is suffering from severe crisis. What is the future of globalization now? My own personal view is we will not be able to stop globalization. There's a little setback, that is okay, but this setback will be overcome soon and we will not be able to stop globalization. Why do I say that? From a very mundane example, just to explain. The first thing, lots of human loss has taken place in many parts of the world. To fill that vacuum, artificial intelligence and machine learning is being prepared and trained, may not be able or sufficient to do it. So manpower movement from reservoir countries like India is obviously going to take place, and we will have to go to provide them the manpower to run their engines, trains, cabs, trucks, and therefore movement of people will take place. Similarly, there will be movement of people in those countries where because of huge human loss, many areas have got impacted. They may like to inhabit those places and open migration in a big way. Third, the advantages of globalization, international trade, have already been time tested and tasted by the world. Therefore, forces and factors, once economies recover, that have been detrimental to globalization will be on the back foot, wean away, and therefore, once again, globalization will be at its peak once recoveries take place and things normalize in the world. So, growth through globalization, exports oriented, FDI, foreign direct investment would take place. Finally, the world has realized that there are countries like India which follow democratic values, which have virgin lands illustratively northeast, which also have the same shared values, are the destinations which one can explore and go and establish industry there. So my own feeling is increasing purchasing power of different parts in the world, many foreign companies would like to come and establish in India their offices. There are 9.5 lakh companies, foreign companies, which operate in China, apart from their own domestic companies. These 9.5 lakh companies are not going to go back and sit into their own domestic countries, which are mainly North America, Canada, Europe, and England. They are, and even Japan, and they are going to go around exploring and scouting for better venues where they can continue their production. Even if they retain their production in China for one reason or the other, they will be looking for alternative sources so that the global supply chains, which were badly impacted by COVID, and the lesson learned, that does not happen again. So, a long story short, there will be a dent in globalization because of leaders like Trump who kept saying that make in America. But after the economies recover, you will once again find a phase where globalization will start booming, and once again, global trade, financial movement of capital will take place in a big way.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one question from Mr. Pankaj Sharma is asking that, in your opinion, is India converted this pandemic as an opportunity, or the pandemic was an obstacle for India? If COVID doesn't take place, then India would be in a better place economically. So it's
Well,
basically looking pandemic into two different way.
yeah, that's fair enough. See, the pandemic was a great leveler in the world. All these, and little philosophically, you remember before the COVID, everybody thought we have conquered the world, we can do anything, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and we have the best intelligence on the in the universe, and all those tall claims that were being made, and we can do this and we can do that. And suddenly comes a virus which crashes that confidence, and everybody did not know where to look for. And then suddenly the vaccinations came, and of course, the vaccines that came did not just fall from the sky. There was research, and the research, which must have started with SARS and MERS, the respiratory sicknesses that were there earlier on. So the research must have started, and it then culminated in the vaccines that came in a very short time. And then the vaccines did some achieve some results, and now it's coming out that some vaccines were not effective and wrong results were produced. In any case, COVID pandemic proved to the world that the world is flat and that we are in it together. We have to learn and be together because it may start in one corner of the planet, it travels to the other, and the whole world then suffers equally badly. So that realization that pandemic brought, I think, is a very important realization. That's why I say the opportunity that in come in India's way, the timing of the presidency is extremely, extremely good. Now, did India use this as an opportunity? To my mind, yes. Firstly, we started providing in the true spirit, and we were still not the presidents, we did not have the presidency of G-20. Much before that, we started in the true spirit of one family, sending vaccines to other parts of the world. Now, let me give you a sharp contrast picture which shows India's wisdom vis-a-vis the wisdom of the Americans. While India very carefully planned the production and the distribution of the vaccines, realizing what is the capacity of daily vaccination, and despite that, as a good neighbor, was exporting some vaccines. America, in contrast, with a population of 33 crore, 330 million, 33 crore, had cornered vaccines 3 times than what was needed by them. Now just look at the contrasting ideology of the two countries and their leadership. The ideology comes from the wisdom of these countries. In India, the wisdom is we are one family. The planet is one. We share a common future. In the advanced countries, that's not the wisdom. The wisdom is I am the center of universe. I should save myself. That's the big difference. In pandemic, by the vision that India showed, the political leadership should be congratulated for that. Despite resistance from within the country, the astuteness and the acumen that the political leadership showed established to the world that these are the people who not only say, but in the midst of a crisis, they are able to provide support. So nearly to 100 countries, we provided the vaccines. It's not a joke. So the leadership is established there itself. So the opportunity was very well taken. When it comes to fiscal policy, monetary policy, financial sector policies, I've already shared with you. And those, some of them have been documented, most of that has not been documented. And I think those need to be documented and shared with the rest of the world. So the leadership qualities that India, from its ideology, from its traditional wisdom, will prove to the world that this is how global accountability, global responsibility is taken care of. You look at the bigger picture. The last point I want to make is amidst the crisis, with shortage of vaccines, and the whole world craving, crying for help, India is able to provide some help. But within the country, India is very careful in not only pouring money into the system when there is no production possible because of lockdowns, investing in long-term infrastructure, which I mentioned in my main talk, which means multiplier effect on employment and growth. That's what India is. So to conclude, I would say India very clearly established that it has the acumen of political leadership globally, and it used the pandemic. And I don't think the purpose of all this support was to use the pandemic, but it so happened that while the whole world was following an ideology which was very inward looking, India's ideology, by very fact of its DNA, was helping attitude and helping as much as possible with the rest of the world. So it was a very big help. With hindsight, you may say, yes, pandemic provided an opportunity to India to showcase its large heart.
Sir, last question is there, sir, from Jitendra Soni. He wants your further little more comments on the high degree of economic inequalities among the global countries, how it is going to, impact.
That's a very good question, and I think it's a right question to be asked in such a situation. Global inequalities, as you know, and Piketty has been talking about it all the time, they have been rising. There's no doubt about it. They have been rising for many, many years, and because of the pandemic, they have become little wider and severe in many countries of the world. How do you handle income inequalities? So I want to answer this question in a phased way. Firstly, do income inequalities exist in India or not? So I would say they exist anywhere and everywhere in the world. Have they precipitated now? Were they not there earlier? Let me remind you of a story from Krishna's time. Who's the best friend of Lord Krishna? Childhood friend? Sudama. Am I right? And do you
Yes, sir.
know Sudama was
Sudama.
very poor?
Hmm.
Even when they were childhood friends, Sudama was poor. And when finally Lord Krishna becomes, he is in full glory, Sudama is still poor. So income inequalities have existed in many parts of the world for many, many years and generations. So it's not that income inequality has just appeared yesterday and we should be alarmed. We have to take care of it. Lord Krishna took care of it. When Sudama came and met him, and Lord Krishna asked him what is happening, and he explained, and Lord Krishna then helped him and took care of the poverty in which Sudama was there. Similarly, if you look at Ramayana, and Lord Ram meets a Bhilni, and there was poverty at that point too. So the point I'm making is, I'm not going to make a big deal that, oh my God, what has happened. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm aware income inequalities are there. They need to be addressed carefully, and they are being addressed carefully. In India, the fiscal policy and the tax rates and the tax concessions, and also in many parts of the world this happens, they are taking care of income inequalities. In India, the free food which the government is continuing to provide, and medical facilities, and low cost social security in terms of insurance, unheard of anywhere in the world, is basically aimed at taking care of income inequalities. So can you imagine insurance at the rates in which we have in India? Such low rates and such choices that we have, and free ration which the government has announced till the end of 23. These are basically aimed when we earn. What are the 2-3 places where maximum expenditure is incurred? On food, government is providing basic food free of cost, not all food. Medical facilities, providing you some insurance cover for medical facilities. And if you look at the state governments, even state governments are providing. To some extent, old age pensions are there. There are some schemes which are benefiting the women, targeted at women. Some schemes which are financial in nature, like the Jan Dhan Yojana, where 45 crore accounts have opened after the Prime Minister started the Jan Dhan Yojana, and many of them are females who are holding those accounts. That also takes care of the income inequalities. The microfinance institutions and the self-help groups, they are providing employment to many women mainly women. That also takes care of the income inequality so that you provide job opportunities. Similarly, mudra loans, and in mudra loans, you have categorization of different types of loans starting from 10,000 rupees. You are providing job opportunities to self-employment. So the point I'm making is taxation theory, the fiscal policy in general, and the public policy, especially in our country, is being adopted, initiatives being taken to somehow mitigate the sharp income inequalities that have increased or that have happened in the last few years. As far as India is concerned, you compare these with the rest of the world, you will realize that the political bosses, and I'm really impressed with the social security schemes that have been announced by the present regime, at such low cost, you provide so much of coverage, both on health and life, is unimaginable. And after COVID, even at the cost of reputation, the free food schemes and the free medicines and the free hospitalization or low cost hospitalization and free vaccination, these all mean that you are attempting to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor and to address the sharp income inequalities that happen in our country.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. It was wonderful session, and even question answer session was also something like another session itself, which has got a very good insight. And I'm sure our participant must have got benefited a lot. And अगर नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस भी अगर एक स्वराज और भारत के विकसित भारत की कल्पना कर रहे होंगे, तो इसी तरह की भारत की कल्पना कर रहे होंगे कि एक समय आएगा जब भारत वास्तव में दोबारा पूरे विश्व को मार्गदर्शन करेगा और देखेगा कि कैसे पूरा विश्व एक परिवार की तरह, एक कुटुंब की तरह बनकर साथ चलता है। सर, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद अपने यूनिवर्सिटी की तरफ से, अपने कैंपस और स्कूल की तरफ से, और मैं अपनी तरफ से हृदय की गहराइयों से आपका बहुत धन्यवाद करता हूँ। इतना वंडरफुल सेशन रहा और मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ सबों के लिए बहुत अच्छा रहा होगा। और सर, आने वाले समय में भी मैं आपको इसी तरह तंग करता रहूँगा। आपके व्यस्त समय में से थोड़ा-सा समय चुराने की कोशिश करूँगा और आप हमें सदा इस तरह का अवसर देते रहेंगे। धन्यवाद। बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद सर। बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद।
Thank you.
थैंक यू सर। सर, हम लोग आगे भी इस तरह से कई प्रोग्राम करने का सोच रहे हैं और सर हम एक बड़ा-सा प्रोग्राम भी पैनल डिस्कशन थोड़ा-सा करेंगे, बट वो नेक्स्ट टर्म में जाके करेंगे। उस समय मैं चाहूँगा कि आपके और भी 2-4 लोगों के साथ मिलके एक पूरा का पूरा कैसे इस मैनेजमेंट प्रोग्राम को और कैसे न्यू जनरेशन को आगे बढ़ाया जाए, कैसे पूरा का पूरा जो इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम है, उसको पुनः स्थापित किया जाए और जो अपरूटिंग हो गई है, उसको रीरूटिंग कैसे की जाए, इस पर सर आप लोगों से चाहेंगे। धन्यवाद। कंप्लीट सर। थैंक यू, थैंक्स अ लॉट। एंड जितने भी हमारे लिसनर हैं, आप लोगों को भी बहुत-बहुत धन्यवाद। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है आप लोगों को बहुत फ़ायदा पहुँचा होगा और आगे इस तरह से आप लोग देखिए और अपने भारत के इस गौरवशाली इतिहास को पुनः एक वर्तमान में स्थापित करने की कोशिश कीजिए। धन्यवाद। Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye, sir. Bye.